Doctor Who Commander decks are on their way. October will be here faster than people realize, and that means you should be looking ahead at what cards you may want to include. With the Suspend mechanic coming back and Commander Masters showing us that Wizards of the Coast is not above keeping cards outside of a set to add reprint equity value, there are some cards you probably should be paying attention to, and in today's video we're going to go through these cards, take a look at the Suspend mechanic, and let's talk about Doctor Who and where these decks could be headed. As soon as I heard the line exterminate, it gets your attention. Doctor Who is going to do well. It is going to be like Warhammer 40k. It is going to sell well, and players are going to play with these, so you need to be aware of what can happen when we start messing around with Suspend. Now, welcome back, everyone. MTG Moxman here, and thanks again for hanging out with me on my channel today. A big shout out and thank you before we start today's video, because we are less than 2,200 subscribers away from getting to 20,000 subs. Thanks again, everyone, for making this happen. To the new players joining the channel and hitting that subscribe button, to players leaving comments in the comment section, turning on the notification bell if you enjoy my content, and watching the daily uploaded videos, guys, it's epic. Now, for Doctor Who. I watched this show, I guess, somewhere in the 80s as a teenager, a young adult. And I remember the guy with the scarf and the curly hair and the policeman's box, the TARDIS, right? I remember the show, but I mainly remember the villains. I remember the Daleks, like the exterminate type thing. So when I saw this was coming up for Universe Beyond, when I look at The Walking Dead, it didn't really interest me. My Little Ponies, Transformers did get me, I can't help it. But Doctor Who is interesting because Lord of the Rings was interesting to me. So it's piqued my interest. And then when I saw that they will be using Suspend, it got me even more. Because we are looking at a whole little bit of a different realm when you start messing with Suspend. Yes, there's new cards in each of these commander decks. Yeah, there's going to be new stuff going on. But when you look at the colors that each of these commanders will have, you look at the Suspend cards, but look further back than that. That's just looking at what's right in front of a player. You're not looking at what's already come and gone. In 2021, they gave us Time Spiral Remastered, so they actually printed some Suspend cards. They've already been reprinted for a few. That's getting things almost like a runway. You're prepping for future sets. Remember, they planned 2 years or more out on paper. So what happens if they already had this all lined up, prepared and ready to go? It's what it starts looking at when you look further back. The data shows you, here are the cards they reprinted. So which ones didn't they reprint? Which cards are being left out when you use a Suspend mechanic that could have future value? And that's when I started to narrow things down a bit. Now, some of these cards could actually show up in those commander decks. They could be there, I don't know that. We haven't seen all the spoilers or anything. We don't know. But I'm looking at cards that could have potential value, but also could save you a lot of money if you're trying to build one of these commander decks and those cards aren't included. Some of these cards are dirt cheap. But understanding how Suspend works, understanding what can happen when you use Suspend as a deck, and the commander himself being, the doctor and what he does with that time-taking sorcery turn thing, it's kind of crazy. So let me show you what I mean here. Let's first look at Suspend. So how does Suspend work? In Magic, several cards bear the unique Suspend ability, letting you exile them from your hand to later cast. Suspending cards usually involves a vastly reduced mana cost, and cards will banish themselves with varying numbers of time counters. At each of your upkeep steps, the start of your turn, you remove a time counter from suspended spells, and when they have none left, you get to cast them for free or for the reduced cost, whatever it said in the actual casting. Now, another way of looking at it is Suspend is a keyword ability in Magic the Gathering that allows you to pay a specific mana cost and exile a card with a number of time counters on it. You remove one of those counters from the card at the beginning of your upkeep and then cast it without paying its mana cost when the last counter is removed. Some Suspend cards have regular mana values with the Suspend mechanic being an alternative cost, and others can only be played by being suspended first. Suspend cards often have lower costs to suspend than would otherwise have been with regular casting costs. Since the downside of waiting to cast the spell, it needs to be balanced. So now we have an idea of what this thing is, what Suspend brings to us, okay? You are going to take a card. You're either going to pay 0, because some cards are 0. You're going to pay 1 white or 1 green or 4, whatever it may be. Usually the more powerful the spell is, the greater the effect. It was how they did Suspend back in the day. Now, of course, things have to be rebalanced. Some cards need to be rebuilt because they're just so out of whack and they're so weak by today's standards. But Wizards has done this. I want you to think back to Modern Horizons 2. Think about some of the cards that they gave us with Suspend. Time Spiral Remastered, followed by Modern Horizons 2, right? And now, a couple of years later, we're getting a product that needs Suspend, that wants Suspend. Which means those cards will have rebuilt. They're rebuilding the reprint equity of those cards. They might be low now. They might be a 30, 40 cent card. But if they don't get added to those commander decks, and they are useful in the Doctor Who commander decks, the price is going to shoot up, and you need to know what these cards are. You need to be aware of them. They may mean absolutely nothing to you. You may not care about them, but at the same hand, being aware of it and buying a couple of these now when they're 40, 50 cents, I think you get the general idea. You will save a lot of money if these things start to spike. So now let's take a look at some of these cards I'm talking about and where I think some of these things will go. We'll start with the Doctor so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. And no, I'm not including the images of the TARDIS or the one of like the Dalek saying exterminate. Those are cards I can cover later. I just want to focus on the Doctor and the Suspend mechanic today because it's going to be a really big deal. The 10th Doctor is a 1 blue, 1 red, 3 generic. That means any card that has blue or red Suspend could be a target for this deck that you need to pick up. But not only that, it may be a card that Wizards is purposely targeting to make sure there is value there. Now, when you look at this card, his first ability says, whenever you attack, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. Put 3 time counters on it. If it doesn't have Suspend, it gains Suspend. Now, the second part of this, which is the more brutal, scary thing for me, is Timey-Wimey. 7 generic mana, which is so easy to do in Commander. Time travel 3 times. Activate only as a sorcery. For each suspended card you own, and each permanent you control with a time counter on it, you may remove or add a time counter. Then do this 2 more times. Now, when we're thinking about the Commander decks, when we're thinking about the colors, you can see that the first one here, we're looking at the Masters of Evil. This will be the Daleks and stuff, but they'll probably all have some version of Suspend in it. So cards that are blue, red, or black mana could be Suspend targets for this card that you need to be aware of. Cards that may be in the deck, which cost nothing, or may not be there, which means the values could go up. Now, the second one is green, blue, and red. There's actually some pretty good blue and green Suspend cards that you need to be aware of. We'll get to those in a few seconds. Now, the next deck here, you can see the Blast from the Past. This is the Doctor I remember as a kid. All blue, white, and green. And, of course, the last one we were already talking about, which, of course, is going to be Timey-Wimey. Now, let's think about what we've just said. We know what Wizards of the Coast is going to do. They're going to print these Commander decks. They're going to do pretty good. But depending on the secondary market value cards that are not added, the value of those cards will go up. They will increase in value for future reprints or reproduction because these Commander decks are created. When these new cards are added, when these new decks get used, there is the potential for cards to increase on the secondary market. And that's what we need to get to now. We need to look at these cards, evaluate which ones could show up and not show up so you can make the best educated guess on which ones you need to buy now for a few shekels on the dollar, or cards that may spike up in value later, like this backdrop here. This is Wheel of Fate. This is a red Suspend card. You probably should be picking it up. It's pretty cheap right now. So let's go ahead. Let's take a look at a few of these cards. Our first card is from Modern Horizons 2, and this is Seoul Talisman. It's kind of like a Soul Ring ripoff. It costs 1 mana, and then you, of course, suspend it for 3. It has tap to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Now, this card right now is a very inexpensive card. We're talking 60, 70 cents to buy this card. But how many copies will get sold? If there are things that remove Suspend counters, if there's a way of getting this card out even 1 or 2 turns faster, Who's not going to use this to help them get out the Doctor on turn 2, possibly turn 1, depending on the combinations of mana you get, including things like Jeweled Lotus. So keep this kind of card in mind, because at 60 cents, buying a few of these is not going to hurt anyone, but if it doesn't show up in any of these decks and there is a use for it, the price could shoot to $5, $6, $7 as people start surging in to buy it, and then you're getting caught paying for things you shouldn't have to if you just had a little forethought and bought it ahead of time. Now, how about Mox Tantalite? People were asking me about this card, and of course, there is the potential for Mox Tantalite to actually start seeing some real play. When we look at Mox Tantalite, you say, okay, what can we do with the card? It has Suspend 3, but it's 0 to get out. Now, it's not a legendary artifact, although it's a mythic, so this card was supposed to be used in Modern Horizons as like you could play 4 in a deck, but there was no way of removing those suspend counters fast enough to really make this a cost-efficient card, which is why it's never shot up. But I've always been of the belief that Moxes, the name they attach to it, means they probably won't let it fail. Now, this card's been out for a number of years, so what could happen? If they find a way of taking off 1 or 2 suspend counters a little bit faster, this kind of card sees a lot more play and a lot more use, because it also taps for any color mana. Remember, cards like this can be broken with just a few cards created, and since we're going back to the suspend mechanic, buying a playset for 20 bucks isn't going to hurt you, but if this card shoots up like a Mox Amber to $30, $40, $50, this is something you need to be aware of, because then it gets out of reach for a player trying to buy the card. Now, our next card is Crashing Footfalls. This one, of course, was a classic people already enjoyed. It has Suspend 4, it's got 1 green, but you get to put a couple of 4/4 creatures into play. And again, if anything comes out with a cheaper Suspend ability, this card finds a real home, and it gets a lot of use. It's less than $5 a card right now. It's a card I'd be paying attention to. We do have a green Doctor deck a couple times over there, so we don't know where cards like this may get possibly reprinted, but there's enough like $2 to $4 equity here that Wizards of the Coast may think that this is a card they're not going to add in to make sure you have to buy it later on, and then use it as a reprint equity card down the road somewhere. Our next card is Curse of the Cabal. For 1 black mana and 9 generic, it's a sorcery from Time Spiral that says, target player sacrifices half the permanents he or she controls, rounded down. It has Suspend 2 for 2 black, 2 generic. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, if Curse of the Cabal is suspended, that player may sacrifice a permanent. If he or she does, put 2 time counters on Curse of the Cabal. But when you think about what's happening with Doctor Who, the potential to just ramp this card out is something you need to be aware of. And yes, it's been reprinted once, I think in Time Spiral Remastered, but there's enough value here that it could rise in value if it doesn't get another reprint and players can find a way to make the effects of this card happen faster. Living End has Suspend 3, and it's 2 black, 2 generic. Each player exiles all creature cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures they control, then puts all cards they exiled this way onto the battlefield. Think about all the ways that players can engineer the type of attack they want just by exiling everyone's graveyards but their own, and maybe even board wipe their own stuff to make sure a massive army hits the battlefield. This is a card players need to be aware of because it has a higher price point that may only go higher in the future. If you're thinking of buying a type of commander deck from Doctor Who that needs a little bit of tweaking, cards like this may be the card you're looking for, and the price could go up if it doesn't get reprinted soon. Now our next card is Fury Charm from Planar Chaos. This card only costs 25 cents, so buying a play set of 4 off of TCG players only going to cost you $1. But this card has a significant effect that players need to be aware of. Number 1, it's an instant. It has 1 red and 1 generic, and it says choose 1. But it has 3 abilities. You can either destroy a target artifact, you can give a creature +1/+1 and trample until end of turn, but it's the last ability that could be a very highly effective ability inside Commander, and that is remove 2 time counters from a target permanent or a suspended card, making a lot of these cards more useful. Yes, it's a combo card. Yes, you're tying up some of your deck space doing this, but depending on how these decks are constructed, what new cards are added in for the Doctor Who Commander decks, cards like this might be invaluable in the future, which is why I'm showing you such a wide selection. And in that moment where I shield for myself, if you're buying any of these on TCG Player, don't forget to use my affiliate link found in the description of every video I put out. When you click that link and it takes you to TCG Player, you're supporting the channel. You're allowing me to get cards for everyone here on the channel to use and be given away as prizes. So it's really epic. Thanks again, everyone who takes time to do that. Now, our next card is Suspend, Modern Horizons 2. It's a blue card. And it says, exile target creature, put some Suspend counters on. But with decks like Timey Wimey and the ability to just like spend 7 mana, you can do it multiple times, by the way, if you had a large enough mana pool, and just add time counters means you can keep this card going. You don't have to stop. Imagine linking cards like this with other things, I don't know, like Isochron Scepter, finding combinations and being able to keep the effect going because you can add time counters is kind of crazy. So cards like this could shoot up in value as well. I'm not expecting all these cards to, guys. They're just things you need to watch because we don't know exactly what Wizards has planned and which cards they're not going to include that may be significant value cards later on. Now, here's Greater Gargadon. I love the name. Now, not a very expensive card, guys, but it's a big giant beastie that has, suspend 10 for 1 red. You don't think much of this. I mean, with this being suspend 10 and 1 red, and with the ability it says sacrifice an artifact, creature, or land to remove a time counter from Greater Gargadon. Activate only if the Greater Gargadon is suspended. So yeah, you can sacrifice, I guess, tokens and things to speed it up. But with the Doctor in play, you might be able to remove those suspend counters very, very quickly. And this card did get reprinted. It's available for players from other reprint sets that were done quite recently. So it's not going to be an expensive card, but it's a card that will probably get utilized. Here we have Horia, and you look at this legendary creature and see it's 1 red, 1 blue, and 1 generic for a 2/2 legendary human wizard that says exile a non-land card from your hand and put 4 time counters on the exiled card. If it doesn't have suspend, it gains suspend. And when you look at the price tag of that card, you can't tell me that spending 50 cents to buy it now, as opposed to it possibly spiking up, which it probably won't. We are hedging our bets, remember, against the damage that could happen from particular cards. Now, if we take a look at our next card, you're going to see that we have a kind of a fun one to think about, and that is going to be the Lotus Bloom. Tons of reprints, guys. It has suspend 3 that says sacrifice Lotus Bloom, add 3 mana of any color to your mana pool. Now, we already showed there's ways of getting these suspend counters off. There are ways of jacking up your mana and making these things happen. This card right now is very inexpensive. But what happens if it doesn't get a reprint in the next couple of years? This card gets FOMO behind it because of what goes on with the Doctor. And then you have a card that goes up to $8, $10, $12 again that Wizards can use as a reprint target later. Remember, a lot of these targets they're thinking of or potentially thinking of are cards they want to reprint in the next 2 to 3 years after this set's already been released. Because the value goes up because players are playing with those cards. And that's what we're talking about. And I mean, I didn't even mention things like Ancestral Visions, the Wheel of Fate here in the background, right? When you start looking at all the possible suspend cards, there's quite a few. Which ones will get hit and which ones won't is what you have to decide as a player. Just knowing the Wizards' mindset of how far they're thinking ahead and planning means videos like this can really help players out in determining which ones they should be minimizing their damage on. Cards that are going to get reprinted, cards that are going to get created that make older cards more valuable from previous sets to build the reprint equity is what you're trying to head off at the pass. You're trying to find those cards, buy them as soon as you know they could have that value, that you might want to build with them when these commander decks or other products come out that are missing key components like Sliverhive did. No one I knew would have thought that Sliverhive wasn't going to be included. And now that you see it spike up in value, you see what happens to it, it just lends more credibility to how Wizards of the Coast is treating us as their audience and as their consumer. So let's play it smart. Let's do some damage here, buy some cheap cards that possibly could go up, but also could make your experience with Doctor Who so much better. Remember, some of these cards probably will appear in those commander decks, some version of them. Well, we have whole new cards coming as well that could make some of these other cards far more valuable. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Do any of these make sense to you? Are you looking forward to Doctor Who, or are you skipping it entirely? It's not a little My Little Pony thing, is it? You guys will let me know in the comment section. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Thanks again for hanging out and allowing me to entertain you. I'll see you guys all tomorrow. Have an awesome day, and bring a friend to Magic. And of course, guys, a big shout out and thank you to the fantastic patrons I have supporting my channel each and every day. Guys, it's amazing to be able to provide you guys with uploaded daily content, and it's because of the patrons, the viewers, the YouTube membership members. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow. I promise you, I did not know the video was going to be this long. This is me trimming it down. This is the best I could do. I apologize now, but it sure was fun putting it together. I think there is something here, and welcome back to the Ramble Jamble. I know you guys wouldn't want to miss this part of the video, but that's where I think things are headed. When you look at these decks and you look how far they're planning ahead, you can get little signs to let you know which cards to pick up. You can look ahead and kind of almost interpret what Wizards is doing as long as Wizards doesn't become aware of it. Interesting, right? The idea. Sliverhive? I just had a bit of a gut feeling. I wasn't quite sure, but I'm like, maybe it won't hurt to pick them up. But now that I'm looking at some of these Suspend cards, Ancestral Visions has been reprinted a lot, but what happens if it doesn't get a reprint and it's needed for these decks? That could be tens of thousands of copies bought in a matter of days. What happens if, what happens if, and then there's the auxiliary cards, the red, blue, and if you can put time counters on and get things at extra turns, you put some time walking cards in there, you go ahead and you add Rouse there for some turn taking, you can add things and augment these decks to make them even better. Wizards will be anticipating that. They've looked to see, here are the 20 cards we're leaving out that will have reprint equity. I can just picture it on the cutting room floor when they design the R&D for this. Because they're not just R&Ding the cards, they're R&Ding the value, the research and development for the future value of what products they'll put out. Always pay attention. Thanks again for being here. Leave a little Necronomicon action, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Awesome day.